Hey guys, and welcome to this new section in this course on aerospace engineering, aircraft systems and avionics. Today we will be discussing the section of avionics. Right, so most of you probably already know that avionics makes reference to the combination of aviation and electronics, meaning that really anything in our aircraft which is related to both aviation and electronics, okay, meaning that anything in our aircraft which is actually related to electronics will be considered avionics, right? So this includes all electronic and electromechanical systems and subsystems, hardware and software in aircraft, right? So again, the definition of avionics is actually very, very broad, okay? And it implies a lot of different instrumentation and systems in the aircraft, right? So I like this image. This image, you can see all the instruments that are used on an aircraft, okay, on this aircraft specifically. And it's actually quite interesting to note how essential avionics are to aircraft. If it were for avionics, we would simply have, a load of materials put together in the shape of an aircraft, but we wouldn't actually be able to operate that aircraft, okay? So avionics is absolutely essential in order to provide a means by which we can actually use this aircraft in an operative way, right? So here you can see the cockpit of this, I believe, is an A320. Again, we can see all the instruments, okay, the monitors that we have been discussing throughout this course. Initially, we discussed the instruments that are used on civil aircraft, for instance, and in commercial aircraft, usually it comes a bit more to a complex way, okay? And basically what we have is an electronic combination of the classical instruments which use, as we saw, the gyroscopes and the pressure-fed ones, okay? This is a combination with also electronic parts, which makes for the most sophisticated way in which we present the instruments, okay? Which is this one over here. In addition, we also have, again, avionics is so complex and so complete that actually anything such as, recording the voice of the pilot can actually be included also on avionics. Okay, we can also include the communications to ground, for instance, and many more, right? So what does it really include, avionics? Well, again, as I mentioned, it includes a lot of different stuff, okay? But generally what it includes is instrumentation, as we've discussed throughout this course, also communication instruments or systems, which allow for the communication from and to the pilot to the ground, right? So to the terminal, to the airport, right? And it also allows for instruments related to navigation, for instance. So all of those tools that are used in aircraft in order to coordinate a navigation process, to visualize or to make the aircraft understand in which direction it is actually moving, okay? So it's basically, especially navigation, it is used in order to, for commercial aircraft, it is commonly used in order to orient the aircraft in one direction or another, right? Or to set a specific type of velocity, for instance. In addition to that, we also have monitoring, right? And the pilot aircraft interface, which is basically the cockpit. And as you can see, all the monitors of the different subsystems of the aircraft, right? Such as the instruments that we've seen already, or radars, for instance, and many more. We also have, for instance, we have the weather radar, which basically, this is a way of actually understanding what the weather conditions are in the surrounding, right? So as you can see, I believe this is the weather radar over here. We'll discuss this a bit more later on. But the idea is to actually visualize the conditions of the weather outside of the aircraft. And what we have is a system in our aircraft capable of doing that, okay? And in addition to that, we also have, for instance, the fuel indicator, which is telling us all the time, the conditions of the fuel. Usually it's the main combination of voltage, intensity, and temperature, right? These three things we will have from most of systems, right? So it's basically related to the systems control, which allows us to understand as pilots whether all subsystems are working and functioning correctly, right? In addition to that, we also have from the system control, we have all the data coming from all the different systems, right? So I'll put an example just in a bit. We also have the flight control, which is, the computer or the autopilot, which allows to correlate all the different variables in our aircraft and actually tell the aircraft what to do, okay? So this would be the autopilot. Imagine this, it would be a computer which considers all the different variables and designs a path for the aircraft in order to land. Of course, the flight control is actually quite complex and very difficult to analyze, but it's very interesting in aircraft, okay? So I encourage you to look more in terms of flight control. And finally, we also have additional systems which sometimes are related to avionics in the case that it is related to electronics, right? Such as the flight recorder, right? Or the black box. So again, the idea of avionics is to relate aviation and electronics, right? So we will need some kind of power supply. What we take is the electrical system that we have discussed in this course. And as we mentioned, what we'll be using is a 14 or 28 volt DC bus for some of the avionics, especially on the cockpit. And for other kinds of avionics, we might be interested on the alternating current bus, right? At 115 volts and 400 hertz, as we mentioned before. In addition to that, I wanted to make a big emphasis on the data handling system. This is referred to in many ways, but commonly what you need to understand in aircraft is that the amount of data that it is being generated constantly is actually quite high. This is due to the fact that we need to control, as I mentioned before, the voltage, the current, and the temperature of many different systems. But in addition to that, we also need some specific information from the different parts, different elements of the aircraft. So this is an example of what we would need from this is the engine, right? So for instance, we have the revolutions per minute that the engine is operating at, We also have the torque, the pressure that the engine is capable of providing in that moment, okay? With also some kind of indicator, green indicator, red indicator over here, okay? Depending on the status of the operation. And we basically have a lot of different variables, the temperature, okay? In addition to that, as I haven't mentioned it in this course, so I think it's quite an interesting thing. I wanted to mention that the tanks are located, the fuel tanks, okay, of our aircraft are located always on the wings. And of course we need information from those tanks, so we need to provide information on the amount of fuel that is available, also the oil, okay, on the engine. Many variables that need to be taken into account constantly, okay? So this is the main thing that I wanted to transmit from avionics. Again, if you like the course, if you're interested in more information, let me know, and I will try to provide any information that you are demanding. And in addition to that, I wanted to thank you all for following this course, okay? And if you think that this course has provided to you information that has been useful to you, I would ask you if you can actually put a 5-star review, okay? Because that actually helps me a lot to grow this course, okay? So thanks, and we can continue.